Good morning, everybody. My name is David Preston, and I'm going to take a verse in Romans, a rather complicated verse, and try and explain it to you. It comes from Romans chapter 3 and verse 24, and it says we're justified by faith, or we're justified as a gift by His grace through the redemption which is in Christ Jesus, whom God displayed publicly as a propitiation through faith in His blood. And if anybody can work their way through all those complicated theological terms, they're doing very well. I'm just going to take the last wee bit that says through faith in His blood and ask the very obvious question, if you haven't asked it before, is what on earth does it mean to have faith in blood? I mean, a person can have faith in someone else. We talk a lot in the Christian circles of having faith in God and trusting Jesus and things like that. But what does it mean to have faith in blood? So that's what I'm going to have a look at. And I want to go right the way back to the Old Testament and talk to you a little bit about Moses. If you remember, Moses spent some time with the Egyptians. Then finally he knew that he was to be a deliverer of the Israeli people, and it came to the time when God specifically told him to go to Pharaoh and ask him or tell him to let the people of God free, the Israelite people free. And Pharaoh of course said no, and there were a number of plagues that took place, and finally at the last one, God said to Moses, I want my firstborn, which is Israel. Israel is my firstborn. I want my firstborn to be freed from this man Pharaoh. And if it doesn't happen, I'm going to take the life of the firstborn of Pharaoh and of his people. So it's either you let them go or the firstborn is going to be killed. Then he was given instructions, and the instructions were that they were to put blood on the doorpost of every house, and as the destroyer came by, if he saw blood on the house, he would pass over. That's the meaning of the word Passover. He would pass over that house and go to the next one and check to see whether there was blood there. So the situation basically was that each particular household was going to safeguard, was going to keep safe the child, the firstborn, by putting blood on the door. But the blood was on the outside. And the specific thing that God said to Moses was, when I see the blood, I'll pass over you. When I see the blood. It wasn't when you see the blood. It wasn't when you come outside and check it. It's when I see the blood, I'll pass over you. So the children were inside. The firstborn in particular was inside, and the angel came at midnight, so only the angel could see the blood. It was too dark for anybody else to see it. And there could have been various moods or feelings of the people that were inside. One child could be particularly happy, another could be quite fearful. The Egyptian families, perhaps some of them took note of what Moses had said, most of them probably didn't. And so the angel came through at midnight. He checked each particular household, and there was an outcry, for many of the children died simply because there was no blood on the door. Now, of course, I'm trying to express and to help you to understand what it means, faith in blood. And what was happening here was that there was an instruction given to them that they should pay attention to the instructions and to put the blood on the door. They had one instruction: put a blood on the door. They had to put faith in what God had said, and that the blood on the door would be sufficient for them. This all happened in darkness. They didn't see anything. Now, what I want you to see is, first of all, that blood was on the door, that they were inside, and that the blood was for God. He was going to either kill someone or not kill someone, but he was going to be the judge, and he had said, if there's blood on the door, I will go and look at another house and pass over yours. Now, that's the first story. The second story makes it again a little bit clearer as to what we mean by faith in the blood. First of all, the story is taken now from the period of time when the Israelites were in the wilderness. They had a tabernacle, a tent, in which God came and revealed his presence to people. And on a particular day called the Day of Atonement, the high priest, the most chief, the most important of all the priests, the high priest, would take blood of a sacrificed goat. He was to take that right into the holiest place inside the tabernacle, inside this tent. There were three parts to the tent. There was the outside, there was the inside, and then there was the innermost part. And you only went into that part once a year. And you could only go in there with blood. And the point was that you went in with that, and it achieved forgiveness and cleansing for the people of Israel for the year that had passed, and they would not have to repeat that until a year later. The point again is that God specifically said nobody was to be in there except the high priest. So the high priest goes in, he's on his own, nobody sees what he's doing, and he offers blood to God. Again, the blood is for God. The achievement or the results or the consequences, of course, are for the people, but the sacrifice is for God. The people outside had to wait until they knew whether or not the sacrifice had been completed. Now, I'm going to take you right through to the New Testament where all of this comes together. In the New Testament, of course, we have the sacrifice of Jesus. Jesus is on a cross. There's darkness over the land. And again, no one can see what's happening because the taking of sin upon himself was something that he did. He did it between himself and the Father. No one knows the extent to which he suffered. All of that is kept quiet. There was darkness. No one knew what was happening. But at the end of it, Jesus said, "It is finished." So the blood that he shed before God for the forgiveness of the world, but he did it in darkness where nobody saw what was going on. So you've got three examples where the sacrifice was made for God, and we're left wanting to know whether or not what Jesus did was actually achievable. Did it actually provide for us the forgiveness that he said it would? What is the indication to us that actually what Jesus did was efficacious? It was actually something that achieved what he said it was going to do. What evidence have we? And you can get a picture of that if you go back to the middle of the two stories, the second story. The reason why we know that the sacrifice of the goat was acceptable to God was that the high priest came back out alive. The reason we know that the sacrifice of Jesus was acceptable to God is that he was raised to life again. Why was he raised to life? Because he took upon us all the sin that we have ever committed and all the sin that we will ever commit. And he dealt with it completely. And because death is a consequence of sin, if he dealt with all the sin, then death cannot hold him. And so he came back to life again. He wasn't coming back to life because of his sin. He was coming back to life because he had dealt completely with our sin. Who was the sacrifice for? It was for God. Was God satisfied with it? Yes, he was. How do we know that? Because Jesus is alive. Jesus was raised to life again. And there's one very clear verse that says it, and it says it in Romans 4 and verse 25. Here's what it says. And you need to look for certain translations, because in some translations it's badly put. Here's the correct translation, then I'll tell you some of the incorrect translations. Romans 4:25, it says, he who was delivered up because of our transgressions and was raised because of our justification. That is correct. The Greek word dia can have two particular cases. It can have the genitive case, or it can have the dative case. If it has the genitive case, it means through or for. If it has the accusative case, it means because. And in the original language, it's the accusative case. It means because. He was delivered up because of our transgressions. He was raised because we were justified. That is the correct translation. And what it's saying is that Jesus was raised to life because he dealt with sin, and because we were made clean and were justified and were in a now right relationship with God because of the sacrifice, he was raised to life again. So what happened here is that the explanation for faith in his blood is faith in a sacrifice that Jesus made. Is it sufficient, is the question that we're asking. And because God has said, yes, it is sufficient, we then have to ask the question, are we doing anything in our lives that suggest that we're adding something because we don't think that that sacrifice is enough? Now, if a Christian prays, we would expect him to pray, we would expect him to read the scriptures, we would expect him to go to church. Those are all good things, and in no way am I saying one shouldn't do those things, but why are you doing them? Are you doing them because there's a sense of gratitude in your heart for what God has done for you? Or are you doing it because you feel somehow you ought to do it because God somehow will not accept you if you don't? If it's the second reason, what you're really saying to God is, I don't really think the sacrifice of Jesus is enough, and I have to do some stuff, I have to do some things to make you happy with me, to make myself acceptable to you. The only thing that is acceptable to God is the sacrifice of Jesus. That is what makes you and me acceptable to God, not the various other things that we do in our lives. Those should always be gratitude, acts of thanksgiving, things that we do because we know we're accepted by God. If we do them for any other reason, it shows that really we're offending God, we're insulting him, we're saying we don't think the plan that you made, the sacrifice of Jesus, actually is good enough. That's why we have faith in the blood of Jesus, in the sacrifice of Jesus. Jews would have had many sacrifices. Roman people would have been doing sacrifices to their gods. But what's happening here, as Paul is writing his letter, he's saying, we have faith in the sacrifice of Jesus, not the Old Testament ones, not the pagan ones. We have faith in one sacrifice only. That is the sacrifice of Jesus. The blood of Christ is sufficient. We have faith in his blood.